9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, David Rothkopf, and we are joined today by two of our friends and favorites who have undertaken an interesting venture, which we'd like to discuss with them. One is Jen Rubin, who for a long time has been a columnist for the Washington Post, but is now one of the founders of something called the Contrarian. And her co-founder there is Ambassador Norm Eisen, distinguished attorney and diplomat, and also friend of this show. How are you, Jen and Norm?
We're great.
Never better if you don't count the crumbling of our democracy.
Yeah. Well, no, that's an issue. I'm personally pretty upset about the polar vortex.
I don't like cold weather. I'm a California
I don't like
and it's not good. Not good.
It's not
Jen
good.
and I are both Los Angelinos.
Oh, how have those fires affected you or those that you know and love?
Profoundly. I don't have a friend who hasn't had to leave. Fortunately, nobody's been burned out. But you know, when your city is hit by something like that, even the people who are safe are in terrible shock, and it's going to be a trauma, very challenging.
And the same. It's just unbelievable. It looks like the apocalypse. It looks like a war zone. And ironically, I was in LA the week before the fires and was actually at the Real Rogers State Park, one of the favorite places I used to take my kids when they were little. The entire place, a few days later, burned to the ground, including this historic home. And just the devastation, the trauma to the city is beyond imagination.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrible. Same with a lot of my friends. We are here. I saw earlier this week you announced the launch of the Contrarian. Your timing couldn't be better because today the Washington Post announced its new motto, which I don't know if both of you have seen it, but it's something along the lines of riveting stories for all Americans, or
Oh my goodness. I thought they were, I heard they were considering democracy thrived in darkness. Did they reject that one?
Apparently, I can't imagine this has been big favorite of your former colleagues there, Jen.
When in doubt, come up with a vapid slogan, and that will solve all things. Because if you haven't been mocked already in the Twitter sphere, in the blue sky sphere, in social media, and everyone else, come up with a hackneyed slogan that means absolutely nothing, and I'm sure it'll all work out. Even better, if you are a Washington Post subscriber, you may have gotten in your inbox a subscriber survey. I urge you all to fill it out. And I just want to say there's a little box for you could describe like your favorite columnist who left the Washington Post. That was the reason for leaving. Just saying. Or you could put in whatever you want.
What if you put in a link to Deep State Radio or to the Contrarian, a subscription link? That's also excellent.
Yeah, it's great. And frankly, subscribing to both would be cheaper than subscribing to the Washington Post.
We should do a package deal like Disney, another ring kisser, does with Hulu and ESPN.
Does this mean we have to pay down?
You know, your sister is a contrarian. David, your sister is a contrarian columnist.
My sister is?
Yes.
She's going
How could you not snap her up? She's one of our two food and cooking columnists. Now, why, might you ask? Why, might you ask, would a new publication that is dedicated to promoting democracy and opposing autocracy, the autocratic emperor has no democratic clothes, why would a publication like that have a cooking columnist, two, multiple humor columnists, comic strip, a youth movement, Olivia Juliana, who was on the TikToker, who was on the dais at the Democratic National Convention. Why?
Why? Why, Jen? Why?
I think Norm is going to tell you why.
Oh,
I
Normus.
David, as an astute scholar, Jen, like you and me, he follows foreign policy matters. He knows well that the pro-democracy movements of Europe, of other backsliding democracies around the world, Brazil, they're led not just by legal and political speakers, and we have those in abundance, from Larry Tribe to Joyce Vance to Ruth Ben Ghiat. They're led by culture. That's what Trump figured out in this election cycle. You go to Rogan's show for the wrestling, for the Ultimate Fighting UFC, and you stay for the autocracy. Well, we want people to come to us for the culture and stay for the democracy. So your sister's cooking column will have a sprinkling of pro-democracy content, David.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm sure it will. So that's what, she has a pod.
Havel was a playwright. He was a playwright and he led that movement. A comedian, really. He wrote funny,
Look
comic,
at
absurd.
Zelensky. Zelensky was a TV
Zelensky.
comedian.
Yes.
Look, as the brother of my sister, who, by the way, has a podcast on our network, um, and as the
We're
husband of an
glad to share her.
as the husband, no, of course, as the husband of an opera singer, as the father of the senior writer on the John Oliver show, and as the father-in-law of a of a writer on the Colbert show, I'm with you.
Yeah.
I am there. This is the world we live in, and I'm very excited that you guys have gone and launched this. Jen, maybe you could give us a sense of why you, in one of the cushiest, most high-profile places you could possibly be, would go off into the world usually occupied by people like us.
If you had told me a few years ago I would leave the august Washington Post to start something from scratch, I would have said, you're nuts. But the Washington Post is not the Washington Post anymore. And the Washington Post is part of the problem. Its owner is contributing to the phenomenon of obeying in advance, of bending the knee. He gave $1 million to the Trump inauguration. Can you imagine Katharine Graham giving $1 million to Richard Nixon? I mean, why do you do such a thing? And you do such a thing when you have no sense that a newspaper is a public trust, that you have an obligation as a free and independent outlet to defend the general good, democracy, and that you don't use it for your own personal financial gain and promotion. And unfortunately, that's what corporate media and billionaire media is doing. We all were under the misimpression that if you got really big and rich and famous, you could withstand pressure. But it's the opposite. These are the first people to fall in line, because enough is never enough. If you're a billionaire, you want more billions, and you have more to lose, your billions, if the new regime punishes you. So when you are serving two masters, you're serving no one. And I began to wonder, and many of my readers began to wonder, what are you doing there? Are you enabling the wrong people? Are you part of the problem? And yes, if you can not figure out a way to fight the authoritarian threat without restriction, without restraint, without compromising, you should leave wherever you are and go someplace and do something about it. And listen, the idea of balancing, an hour of Jen Rubin, an hour of Hugh Hewitt, that's madness. And whether it's Hugh Hewitt or some other MAGA flunky, you don't serve the public by creating a false equivalence between someone who is in good faith interpreting and explaining the authoritarian threat and someone who's a stooge for the authoritarian regime. So at that point, I said, you know what? I can do better than this. I should do better than this. And then, of course, Norm is a force of nature. And I was skeptical for a while. Norm convinced me, as Norm can convince anyone of anything. In this case, he was right. He says, we will be a hit. We will be the beginning of something new. And I thought to myself, I don't know, throwing away, the security of the Washington Post. How is this going to work? Norm's enthusiasm and familiarity with launching new things, new organizations, overcame any resistance I had. And for about a nanosecond on Monday morning, before we threw the switch, I thought, what if no one cares? What if no one reads us? What if we're shouting in the wilderness? And even beyond Norm's expectation, I do not think Norm, in all of his
No.
imagination, thought we would be getting this kind of reception. When this tidal wave has washed over us this week, I knew we were doing the right thing. I knew there's a hunger out there. I knew people want something else. They don't want to be annoyed constantly by reading mainstream media that engages in this nonsense. Like you, I am sure you've stopped following much of the mainstream media because it's garbage. It only infuriates you. It doesn't enlighten. It is simply perpetuating this normalization, this gamification of politics. It's not what we need. It's not how you stay engaged. It's not how you fight back. So, given the fact I could barely read most of the rest of my paper, I thought it was time to go.
So the two lines from this week that for me best exemplified what we're hoping to do was um, in our cover, both of us wrote overnight. We were faster than any other opinion page to have responses to the Jack Smith report. And I wrote in there that that Washington should be viewing Trump's approach roughly the way it viewed the approach of the British in the War of 1812. And instead, there's this passivity, widespread passivity, or we'll see. And the Jack Smith report to me is another alarm. I mean, the shocking expose of the 5-part attempted coup of 2020. And now Trump, by a very slim margin, is returning to the office where he can pull the levers of coup power again. So the alarm needs to be loud. And that's how we covered the Jack Smith report, not as some people did. Well, both special counsels expressed concern in their cover letter. David Weiss did not like what Biden said, and Jack Smith did not like what Trump said. Trump is threatening to put Jack Smith and his staff in jail. It's not the same thing. And the other line of the week, which Jen and I agreed she never could have gotten through the Washington Post. How do you cover these kabuki dances? That's going up on the Hill. This highly ritualized hearings which have no meaning. So Jen wrote along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, that it's the worst DEI ever. That the Trump administration represents a DEI for unqualified, unethical, corrupt white people. And I thought that that is the right lens. And actually, reported opinion, David, is more important now. We no longer have the luxury of false neutrality. Now is the time for taking sides. That's part of how Poland saved their democracy. It's the last thing in this sequence. When the Polish regime, the autocratic regime, started appointing judges, the mainstream media headlines were fake judges appointed to high court or fake judges appointed to real court. They used Andy Borowitz, another one of our contributors, to write the Andy Borowitz approach to write actual news headlines. So we think that autocracy calls for a different, more opinion forward form of reporting, and that's what we're doing.
So, what's the ask of the audience? You guys look to me like
Subscribe.
you're on.
Subscribe, the Contrarian Substack. That is our main ask.
And
Well,
by the
that's
way,
exactly what I wanted to get at. It,
we're going to advance. Never before on this program, David, you're getting an inside scoop. On Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Norm and I are going to go live on Substack Chat and take questions from our subscribers. So if you get in your subscription now, you can chat with Norm and I. And I don't know how this is going to go because when Norm and I get going, sometimes things get out of hand. But
That's
we
the
look forward to it.
That's the second prize is you get to live chat with us for the entry level subscription. The premium subscription privileges you can avoid live chatting with us. You get a lifetime guarantee. You will never need to be on a Zoom with Jen and Norm.
But
But
Norm will come over and
seriously,
cut your lawn. I'll watch your cars. I'll do some minutes.
so yes, we welcome every subscriber, and because we're committed to transparency, we're gonna with subscribers. There will be regular content like that, live Zooms, podcasts, exclusive content from contributors. But there's also a lot of material, whether you're a subscriber or not. And of course, if you're someone who cannot afford a subscription, democracy comes first. Let us know. And we welcome all readers, and there's something for everybody at the Contrary.
and so, how is the Contrarian different from the Bulwark or some of the other places that are like that?
We think we're our own thing. And because we're all old enough to remember a magazine that came like the little brown envelope, not covering it like a Porto magazine, but a little
Yours
thing
came in an anonymous brown envelope. What kind
Yes,
of
there you go.
magazines were
It
you
was like a
ordering?
wrapper around it. It had the mailing address, the label on it. It was called a magazine, children. It was in paper. And there was a phrase that described them. There was the front of the book, which was the hard news. In our case, it's the democracy, it's the legal analysis. We're going to have economic experts. We're going to have really hard thinking stuff. But then there's something called the back of the book. And the back of the book was where you flipped if like you'd heard all the news, or even if you had heard all the news, you wanted the good stuff. And that was everything from books and film and all the rest of it. And we don't think there's anyone first of all, in the democracy space, but really anywhere who has both those things together. We are recreating a robust front of the book and back of the book so that there is something that will draw in all kinds of people. And one thing we learned in the election, David, is a very large percentage of people who got no news whatsoever voted for Donald Trump. Well, maybe we can lure some people in with sports or with fashion or with humor, and they'll take a peek at what our analysis of what's going on. So we offer a lifeline for democracy, which is a pipeline to the rest of the country that the mainstream media just isn't serving, isn't reaching.
It's a wonderful. We had a wonderful time. As you can tell, even from this podcast, we laugh a lot. We think laughter is very important to combating autocracy. That's the check in me. It's not just Havel, the other leaders of the dissident movement, like Ivan Klima, a marvelous comic novelist. Before that, they learned at the feet of those who fought the benign Austro-Hungarian Empire, which my grandfather uh, was drafted to serve in the army. Those like Hasek, who wrote The Good Soldier Schweik, or Kafka. Kafka would have felt right at home in Eileen Cannon's courtroom or appearing before Alito and Thomas. Let me tell you, Yosef K. from the trial when we were figure our slogan is we're owned by nobody. But when we were piloting slogans, one of those that we thought about was seriously funny, because it's very serious, but we think mockery, satire, humor, ridicule is a very important part of the mix. So it's kind of it's its own thing. We love and venerate those like the Bulwark who came before us, Substack pioneers. Many of the biggest Substack contributors, like Joyce White Vance. Joyce is also a contributor to the Contrarian, in addition to her own Substack. She's doing a very wonderful work for us, and we are our own thing. We're 3.5 days old. We're 200 about 250,000 subscribers already, and growing exponentially. And we're having a great time, even though there are some very dark clouds looming. As I'm the child of Holocaust survivors, and one of the wonderful people in my parents' social circle who escaped Vienna said that their slogan in the 30s was, "The situation is critical, but it's not serious." So we like to not. Our situation in America is critical. We like to not take it too seriously.
So we are in our infancy. We're 3.5 days old, and we don't sleep through the night. So we are
That's
working,
true.
kind of furiously. There are very few people with us right now who do the nuts and bolts of putting out a platform and setting this up, but they are all phenomenal people. And heads taps off to Norm, who put together a remarkable staff who do all of the infrastructure and the backup for us. And they have been superstars in working on this new project that
Amazing.
they have been.
There are about 10 of them. They're actually in the next room here at the Contrarian's office. It's an undisclosed location. It's like the journalist protection program. And the staff has jumped in. It's been super. And, we're producing a fair amount of content. We're doing video. We have uh, the essays, the Substack essays, and we're having a great time. It's a good medicine to cope with the autocratic threat and the anxiety that generates. It is not a lot of sleeping involved in starting a brand new media platform. I will tell you that.
Uh, I know.
You do.
Although we are a much smaller venture with sort of I guess different kinds of objectives. But for example, Jen, next week we have an inauguration. What are you going to do about that?
Oh, we have a big plan for that. We think the inauguration of a buffoon requires satirical coverage. And we are going to have satire and mockery all day long. We're going to have Andy Borowitz. We're going to have a whole panel of comedians. We are going to have Norm and I. We are going to savage the proceedings, because when the authoritarian regime attempts to present itself as all powerful, as all knowing, as above reproach, the one thing they cannot tolerate is mockery and satire. And we're going to just shovel it out there on Monday. We're also going to have serious, important historical framing and analysis from Ruth Ben-Ghiat, because she is one of the premier experts in totalitarianism, and she's going to help us analyze what is there. And we're going to have some pieces on the run up to the inauguration. But coverage itself, all of you out there, if you cannot bear to sit there and watch the mainstream media intone that he looks so presidential, gosh, in the great tradition of America, Donald Trump now takes the other one. If that makes you want to throw up, come join us, because we're going to treat it the way you wished the mainstream media was going to treat you.
What is the name of that TV show, Mystery Science Theater, where they do the voiceovers on the movies. It's going to be like that. So, the whole way that you approach fighting autocracy has to have this mix of seriousness and laughter. And that is the unique thing about, I think, an unusual thing that we're so heavily and equally invested in the front and back of the book.
And is there a longer term goal, or is it just simply I mean, which is not a
Oh,
minimum
yes.
thing, maintaining the fight for democracy and against autocracy?
Our long-term goal is to be able to sleep through the night by January 30th. That is the current on the strategy whiteboard. We want to get back to a good night's sleep, and then that'll give us the mental capacity to make a plan for February and March.
And if we do nothing else, we'd like to spur some people who still are in these legacy outlets to do a little bit better. If they see subscribers flocking to your podcast, to Contrarian, to the Bulwark, maybe that will rouse them to do a little bit better. And that would be a triumph too. We don't, although we mock them incessantly, we do not think it's a good thing for the Washington Post and the New York Times to be part of the problem. It really is not. And if we can in some way inspire them or push them to be a little less pathetic, then that would have accomplished something as well.
You also can't, the Post is except Zuckerberg, Bezos, Musk, what he's done to X. Those are three exceptionally bad institutions. I think ABC News bowing the knee on libel. There's a lot of good on the
Don't leave
news.
out the LA Times. There,
The
Oh my
LA Times, I was about to say there's still a lot of good people, but the LA Times is in the crapper. Those five, I think Disney gets an honorable mention since they forced. I know George Stephanopoulos. I think it's since leaked that he didn't really want to do that thing. It's public. I'm sure that was not what he wanted, but Disney mandated it, so Disney's in that kind of Mount Rushmore of ass kissing. It should be like carved with puckered lips of those six institutions.
you're giving me a good idea, because on the backside of Mount Rushmore, nothing has been done. It's just,
right.
Oh
if
my
you could,
God. No, what? Yes. What they should put Trump's backside over there and then have all the people like in a line. The six who I've just named in a line. So, you can't really, Jen and I, part of and she jumped for the Post is the lowest of the low to change your, and there's the New York Times just took a very excoriating op-ed from me about sleepwalking, a wake-up call. You can't really, you do have to maintain those gradations. We will see where other mainstream outlets go. I know there is a lot of disappointment in some of the stuff the Times does. I think they still do a lot of amazing stuff. Let's see, as Jen says, we don't only want to be negative, we're hoping that, and then we know, I will tell you, we get calls from every institution I've named and many others. Sometimes we get resumes. That's been another shock. People are
by the way,
very,
don't leave out
people are hungry.
Jen. I don't want to leave out the crappy demimonde of Washington publications that cover politics because in various dumb ways, like, we're going to write the shortest story possible on this, or we are going, I mean, there's a whole other set of publications that are doing a really crappy job too. Or am I wrong about that?
I think there is, first of all, there's a failure in that the Washington Post has never covered Washington, D.C. That is their beat. That is their state, their city. And there's an appalling neglect of what is going on within their borders. That is very true of national papers that happen to reside in a city. If you want to find out what's going on in New York City politics. Don't read the New York Times because that's beneath them. So we have a crisis in any kind of local coverage.
But by the way, what I meant was Politico, Axios,
yes,
Semaphore.
yeah, all of it is the same nauseating gamification inside politics. We're going to explain how politics works. We're not going to show any moral predilection about what's going on. It is horse race, it's poll obsession, it's snarkiness for the sake of snarkiness. It's a sense that the only thing that matters is the game, and they are gamesmen, and they are going to they're going to cover it like a football game, and they're going to show you how smart they are by giving you the inside minutia of what is going on. In the meantime, Rome is burning, and they take no notice and show no interest. So they have completely missed the forest for the trees. And you're right, it is this insularity within Washington, D.C., and to some extent,
The two of you are in a more critical place than I am, because I enjoy the cocktail parties at the Washington Correspondents' Dinner. Um,
Ugh,
the
ugh,
the the
horrible,
the
horrible. You really got to work on that
I'm
somehow.
going to work on them. We work on each
Wait
other.
a minute.
That's what this
Let
partnership is
me,
all
but
about.
here's what I want to say. And there
The
is a
reality is,
general,
Norm, you just like schmoozing. You are a real schmoozer. You
that's
can't.
why, that's what I come, we're hiring a gossip columnist. We're going
It's
to have
Norm
a gossip
Eisen on your
column.
side. Norm
It's going to
Eisen is
be
going to
an
be our gossip.
anonymous, but it's really me. Um, I want to say that I think you have to distinguish between those outlets. And I think in that there is a value to the raw data that I get every morning. I'm a Hill person, and in particular a House person. A lot of my career has involved working in the House, representing clients in the House, testifying in the House, which I've done many times, occasionally in all those things in the Senate, much more in the House. Washington has kind of got Senate people and House people. There is a value to what I get in the morning of the raw data in a punch bowl or a Politico playbook. I can't understand what is happening, and I can't write about what is happening without all that raw data. I do think that there are some, though, who have who have bent the knee in that class of publications. They smell where you know, I like to say, wake up and smell the fascism. There's a certain amount of access journalism, and that's unforgivable, to compromise your principles for the sake of access journalism. But I don't, I haven't. But I require that data that I get every morning. I read Punchbowl, I read Politico, I read Jewish Insider, which vexes me no end because but it's essential. Jen, we should, and then there's some, I won't name them. There's some things that I don't read because they're access journalism.
I think my beef with those kinds of publications is they think that's the whole kit and caboodle. For Norm and for it's one little data point so we can understand the big story, which is the authoritarian threat. They're the leaves and we're the forest. They are obsessed with this little stuff. And as Norm says, it's like a little bit of data that we put in one ear when we go out and cover the greatest story of our era, which is the collapse of democracy. That story is not on the pages of those outlets. They give us the little fodder, the little tidbits, so that we kind of, know who's who. But that's not the story. That's not what's important. That's a data point. That's background information for Norm and I. Where is their coverage of democracy? Where is their critical analysis of the
I want to offer you. I want to offer you a slight, just a perspective here from the sidelines, and that is, I think you're absolutely right, but I think there's a kind of a different dimension to it. They're just part of the story, but the culture of Washington, that is so oriented towards money and getting ahead and not making waves and getting along and so forth has enabled the rise of the oligarch puppet masters behind the would-be autocrats.
The
And
culture of New York is about making money, and the culture of Washington is about making power. It's two different ways of getting along. But remember, this is what's so striking about the collapse of Bezos. It's one thing, what you and Jen are talking about, and I do have a slightly different perspective on it. Um, it's one thing to lose the forest for the trees, maybe in good faith, maybe like a little bit of,
Self-absorption,
you're
they say
trapped in a
opportunity.
you're trapped in a 20th century journalism model, and you don't realize that it's burning down everywhere around you. And there's good people, and that's one thing. It's another thing to actively collaborate. Bezos and Zuckerberg um, and their ilk and Musk, they're not sleepwalking, they're power walking. They're running towards fascism. So those are all different. Jen, I actually think these hierarchies here, we're teasing out something on David's show
Yeah, we're writing a
about
column on your show here,
about
David.
the
This is how we do
different
it.
this is what our editorial meetings are like. Frankly, even when we just get together to have lunch, it ends up like this. But it's the different flavors. There's complicity, there's enabling, there's kind of good faith sleepwalking, and those are all different. You can't lump them all together. You can't really, it's inapt. What Bezos, Zuckerberg, and Musk are doing is the worst of the worst. They have become disinformation enablers, purveyors, and collaborators, and they know better.
Right.
4 years ago, Zuckerberg was funding safe, free, and fair elections. Bezos was saying democracy dies in darkness. Musk was a Democrat. So, that's the worst of the worst. And Trump, of course, is worse still because, he's the Pied Piper of fascism.
I wish I could go on, but I also know that I don't have to go on because you're going to go on and on. You've created a venue in which you can, the Contrarian, which people can subscribe to at Substack. It is very clear that what you're doing has a lot of intelligence and wisdom and experience and energy and humor and vitality behind it, which are all good reasons to go there. And it certainly seems like an antidote to a lot of what we've got. We're a small little policy-oriented operation, but still somehow there's 1 million downloads a month because people really want to get there.
Amazing.
And we're tiny, but if we can help boost what you're doing, we
You
want to do
can.
it.
You
We
can.
admire you guys enormously and also like you guys enormously. And congratulations on the
Thank
first
you.
3.5 days of success. I wish you
Thank you.
next 3.5 days of great success, and then week after week like that. And come back here. And then when you wanted, we do the New Republics podcast. We're doing a series of podcasts for the MIT Technology Review. We can do something with you. So when you're ready for that, come visit us. And if you're not ready for it, just come and visit us anyway.
We invite you to guest contribute a column to the Contrarian, and we'll return the favor and contribute to you, including by being on your wonderful podcast for the umpteenth time.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. As somebody with my own little Substack and columnist for the Daily Beast, I will never contribute a column for anybody else because I am so columned out. As Jen knows, it just drains your brain, and and then hosting, one or two podcasts a day. So my brain is empty. You don't want it. The people you've got have full brains, and it sounds.
No, your brain is like one of those chocolate fondue fountains that a bar mitzvah ever replenishing.
Mm, mm, thank you. It's a great, it's a great image. You two guys are great. Mazel tov. Good luck with it. And again, it's the Contrarian at Substack.com. We're the DSR network. If you are not subscribing to us, please do that too, for God's sakes, after all this. And after almost 10 years of doing it. And we'll all see you back here again soon. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Norm. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much for
Bye
having
bye.
us.
Bye. Thank you.